Ray Schneider says L5 is a stepping stone into permanent colonies, and space seems worth some talk. It will be a great habitat for those building other large space structures, and it could be a great tourist destination too. The L5 is one of the reasons I wanted to take this question was because many of you may not know about this step out the Lagrange points. There's a weird sort of thing going on with orbital mechanics. If you have a body, let's say the Earth, and you have an object that's in orbit around the Earth, it's circling, its gravitational pull is towards the center of the body, but the body is moving tangentially to the gravitational pull. And so what happens is the gravitational pull continuously bends the line around the planet. The object falls around the Earth, but it's falling around the Earth so fast that it never hits the ground. It just keeps falling around it and around it and around it. There's another neat little app that's really fun, really just a fun thing to play, because the physics of it are so good. It feels a bit like Kerbal in the sense that, but you don't get to see little astronauts, but the physics of it are so good. Just give me 1 second here. Because I really would highly recommend this for those of you out there who love this kind of stuff. It's called New Orbit. It's a little app called New Orbit. And it gives you little missions, and you have to land on things, and you have thrust. But the great thing is you get a little thrust vector, and you can find out that keep burning in one direction, and that vector gets longer and longer and longer. And then you rotate 90 degrees, and you burn, and you watch the vector slowly bend. It's a great, great little thing called New Orbit. And it'll give you a really good sense. I'm not even going to show it to you. Give you a really good sense of how orbital mechanics work. So generally speaking, an orbit around a body is stable. But what's interesting is that if you have the moon orbiting the Earth, for example, or the Earth orbiting the sun, there are other places that a mathematician called Lagrange figured out were also stable. One of them is, they're L points, I think there's 5 of them. One of them is the point, take the Earth and the sun, for example. There's a stable gravitational point that is directly in line with the sun. There's one that's directly opposite the sun. But the interesting ones are, there's ones that are the radius of the Earth's orbit is 93 million miles. So it's 93 million miles from the sun to the Earth, and 93 million miles forward and backwards of the Earth's position, L4 and L5. And what basically happens is a little kludgy way to describe it, but you can kind of think of the Earth pushing things along at L4 and dragging things along at L5. They're stable places. You can actually park stuff there. And the gravitational effect of the Earth in motion keeps them there. And there was a lot of talk when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s about space colonies and there was the L5 Society and putting giant, enormous orbiting cities in space. And nobody's really talking about doing that anymore because we don't even have a space transportation system. We don't even have a capsule that's getting our guys up to the space station that we paid for that the Russians can get to now. The idea of these giant habitats and colonies, I think, are probably interesting because really what you're doing is you're kind of building an Earth in space, and I never really thought about this much before, but I think everybody wants to live there because I think most people who want to live in a space colony really it's not the view. They just kind of cherish the idea of living in an environment free of dicks, free of losers and parasites and crime, because you can't afford it. You've got a limited ecosystem. You can't afford crime up there. You can't afford slackers up there. You can't afford. You got to be on your game when you're in space. Space is a frontier, and the harder conditions are on the frontier, the more people are going to be selected for a certain letter, as opposed to another letter. So I think that's kind of the appeal of the L5 thing. I think space colonies are a long way away. The one thing I'll just say about that is I think we need to be thinking about when we build things in orbit. When we build them in orbit, we really need to be building them in orbit from somebody's basement, through telepresence, through robots, through vehicles that are pretty straightforward, just a binocular set of TV cameras. You've got a couple of mechanical Waldos. You've got a oxidizer tank and a fuel tank, reaction control things, and some things to clamp and grasp things on. That way, you can assemble a space station or a vehicle 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in a nice air-conditioned room in Mojave or Houston or wherever, and you basically don't have to EVA and go through the risk, and not to say the expense, of getting people up there. And you can basically have, 19-year-old kids, probably 19-year-old boys would be the best you could do for this. Their motor skills are so good. That's why they enjoy video games so much. And I've played video games, and I'm a pretty decent video gamer, but I'm no match for these 19, 20, 21-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds. Their reflexes are far, far, far faster than mine. And they've got tremendous sense of 3D space. So what you would do is you would put in orbit, you'd put a refueling station, and you have a number of these mechanical robots that are basically just flying fuel tanks with arms and binocular vision, and you assemble the thing using telepresence. And telepresence is the word, because what you're not even looking at a screen. When you've got those goggles on, you are in the vehicle. You're actually in space. That's where your head is. That's in Aurora. That's in the very early in Aurora. And Aurora, the vehicle, is built on the ground by robots, and one of them comes up and salutes, and one of the guys plays air guitar, and it's perfect. That's the way to do it. So if you're going to be talking about building big habitats up there, Ray, you're not going to get the material for a space colony at L5 or anywhere else. That material is not coming off the surface of the Earth. It's going to have to come off of the asteroids or conceivably the moon, because there's just so much energy required just to get a pound of anything from the surface of the Earth. It's such a strong gravity on this planet. But if you're mining your minerals off the asteroids, there's essentially zero gravity, a gravity of 1,000th of a G on an asteroid, and maybe 100th or 2 on a big asteroid like Ceres. And the moon is a quarter of the Earth's atmosphere, a quarter of the Earth's gravity. Sorry, a sixth of the Earth's gravity, and no atmosphere. You just blow that stuff off into space on a railgun, you're good to go. So there's some big steps to take before you get to space colonies, I think.